The moment someone shows you who they truly are is usually the same moment your heart breaks forever. I was still holding the hospital phone in my trembling hand when I called my daughter-in-law that night. Outside my kitchen window, the February rain tapped softly against the glass, and the clock above my stove read 11:42 p.m. I remember that detail because after that moment time stopped feeling normal to me. "Melissa," I whispered the second she picked up, my voice already breaking apart. "There's been an accident." For a second, I heard nothing but muffled music and distant laughter on the other end of the line. Then came her sigh. Not panic. Not fear. Not even confusion. Just annoyance. "Evelyn, can this wait?" she asked. I closed my eyes so tightly my forehead hurt. "Daniel is gone," I said. "My son, your husband, he passed away tonight." Silence. The kind of silence that makes your stomach turn cold. I thought maybe the call had dropped. Then she finally spoke again, her voice low and irritated like I'd interrupted something important. "I'm busy with my boss right now." I felt my fingers lose strength around the phone. "Melissa," I whispered, unable to breathe properly. "Did you hear what I said?" "Yes," she answered quickly. "I heard you." Another pause followed. Somewhere behind her, I heard glasses clinking and someone laughing loudly. Then she said the words that still wake me up at 3 in the morning. "I can't deal with this tonight." 5 seconds later she hung up. Just like that. No crying. No questions. No disbelief. No "I'm coming." Only silence. I sat there staring at my reflection in the dark kitchen window, while rain slid slowly down the glass like tears. My son was dead, and his wife sounded more inconvenienced than heartbroken. I kept waiting for my phone to ring again. I told myself she was probably in shock. Maybe she needed a minute. Maybe she'd call back crying. Maybe she'd rush to the hospital. Maybe there was still some humanity left in the woman Daniel had loved for 12 years. But the phone never rang. Midnight passed. Then 1 in the morning. I sat alone at my kitchen table wearing the same gray cardigan I'd had on all evening, staring at Daniel's 4th grade school picture taped to my refrigerator. Blonde hair. Crooked smile. Freckles across his nose. My beautiful boy. I remembered the last thing he said to me 3 days earlier before hanging up our Sunday phone call. "Love you, Mom. Don't stay up too late watching those crime shows." I almost laughed remembering it, but the sound caught in my throat and turned into something broken instead. Around 1:30 a.m., the hospital called again asking if any immediate family members would be coming to identify Daniel in the morning. I opened my mouth to say Melissa's name, but something inside me stopped. Because deep down in a place I didn't want to face yet, I already knew the answer. She wasn't coming. By 6:30 the next morning, the rain had stopped, but the world outside still looked gray and exhausted, like it had cried all night with me. I drove to St. Matthew's Medical Center with both hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. The roads were nearly empty except for a few delivery trucks and tired commuters heading toward downtown Chicago. I kept expecting my phone to ring at any second. I kept imagining Melissa finally waking up to reality, calling me in tears, begging for details, asking where to go. But the screen stayed dark the entire drive. The hospital parking garage smelled faintly of concrete and motor oil. I parked crookedly between 2 white lines because my hands would not stop shaking long enough to straighten the car properly. Inside the lobby, everything felt painfully normal. Nurses carried coffee cups. Elevator doors opened and closed. Someone at the front desk laughed softly at a joke I could not hear. I wanted to scream at all of them that my son was gone, that the world should stop moving for at least 1 minute, but of course it did not. The young woman at reception looked at me kindly when I gave Daniel's name. "The family consultation room is down the hall, ma'am," she said gently. Family. The word almost broke me. I walked slowly past rows of plastic chairs until I reached a small room with pale blue walls and a coffee machine humming in the corner. There were 2 chairs beside each other near the window. I sat in one and stared at the empty chair beside me. Melissa's chair. I kept looking at the door, expecting her heels to click against the floor at any moment. Every time footsteps passed in the hallway, my heart jumped. But nobody came. After 20 minutes, a police officer entered carrying a folder under his arm. He looked to be around Daniel's age, maybe early 40s, with tired eyes and silver beginning to show around his temples. Mrs. Carter? He asked softly. I nodded. I am Officer Reynolds. I am very sorry for your loss. I thanked him automatically because that is what women my age do even when our hearts are collapsing inside our chests. He sat across from me and glanced briefly toward the empty chair beside mine. His wife is not here yet, he asked carefully. Something about the question made heat rise into my face. I lowered my eyes toward my purse and forced a small smile that did not feel real. She is probably on her way, I lied. Officer Reynolds nodded politely, but I could tell he did not believe me. A few minutes later, he explained they needed a family member to confirm Daniel's identity. I thought my legs might give out walking down that hallway. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead while my shoes squeaked against the polished floor. Halfway there, my phone finally vibrated in my coat pocket. My heart nearly stopped. Melissa. I answered immediately. Melissa. I whispered. Her voice sounded calm. Too calm. Can you text me the name of the funeral home once you decide? She asked. I stopped walking. The funeral home? I repeated weakly. Melissa, I am still at the hospital. There was a pause. Then she sighed quietly, almost impatiently. Okay, just let me know later. I have meetings today. Before I could answer, the line disconnected again. Officer Reynolds looked back at me from the end of the hallway, waiting quietly beside a gray metal door. And for the first time in 12 years, I felt something cold and unfamiliar settle deep inside my chest whenever I thought about my daughter-in-law. Grief does strange things to time. Some moments disappear completely, while others stay trapped in your memory forever like a photograph you cannot throw away. I barely remember driving home from the hospital that afternoon, but I remember every second of walking into Daniel's house later that evening. Melissa had finally agreed to meet me there so we could discuss funeral arrangements. The February wind cut sharply through my coat as I stood outside their two-story brick home in Naperville, staring at the porch light glowing against the darkening sky. Daniel used to joke that the house looked like something from a home improvement magazine. He had spent years fixing every little detail himself. Fresh white shutters. Perfect landscaping. A maple tree planted in the front yard the year they got married. I stood there for a moment wondering how a house could still look so alive when the person who built it was gone. Melissa opened the door before I knocked. For one brief second, I prepared myself to see a devastated widow. Instead, I saw perfectly styled blonde hair, fresh makeup, and a cream-colored sweater that looked too elegant for someone whose husband had died less than 24 hours earlier. Hi, Evelyn, she said softly, stepping aside to let me in. Her voice sounded controlled. Practiced almost. The smell of vanilla candles filled the house. Not tears. Not coffee from sleepless morning. Vanilla candles. I noticed wine glasses in the sink beside the kitchen island. 2 of them. Melissa quickly moved a dish towel over one before turning toward me again. I have been making calls all day, she said, rubbing her temples dramatically. This whole thing has been overwhelming. I nodded slowly, though something deep inside me felt unsettled. She still had not asked me what happened to Daniel during his final hours. Not once. Most wives would have wanted every detail. Instead, she walked straight toward the dining table where papers had already been spread neatly into piles. Funeral home brochures. Insurance forms. Bank documents. I figured we should stay organized, she said. Daniel would have wanted that. Her fingernails tapped lightly against a folder labeled life insurance policy. I stared at it for a moment longer than I should have. The policy amount is substantial, Melissa continued carefully. I have not had time to go through everything yet, but there are mortgage questions and retirement accounts we need to discuss. The word sounded strange coming from her mouth. I sat down slowly at the table while my chest tightened. Melissa, I said quietly, my son just died yesterday. She blinked at me like she had forgotten that fact for a second. Then her expression softened instantly, almost too quickly. Of course, she whispered, touching beneath her eye carefully so she would not smudge her mascara. I am just trying to handle things. I looked around the room. Everything was spotless. Decorative pillows perfectly arranged. The television muted on a financial news channel. No signs of chaos. No signs of grief. Then my eyes landed on Daniel's winter coat hanging over the back of a chair near the garage door. Something about seeing it there nearly stopped my breathing. He had worn that coat every winter for years. I stood slowly and walked toward it without thinking. My fingers brushed the sleeve gently, and for a second I could almost hear his voice again. Melissa's heels clicked quickly behind me. "You can leave his things for now," she said sharply, then softened her tone again. "I mean, later might be easier." But as I turned toward her, I noticed something strange for the very first time. Melissa was not looking at Daniel's coat. She was staring directly at the inside pocket like she was afraid of what might still be hidden there. There are moments in life when your instincts begin whispering the truth long before your heart is ready to hear it. Melissa crossed her arms tightly the second she noticed me looking at Daniel's coat. "You should sit down," she said quickly. "You look exhausted." But I did not move. I reached slowly toward the inside pocket anyway, feeling her eyes follow every inch of my hand. The fabric still carried the faint smell of Daniel's cologne mixed with cold winter air. For one impossible second, it felt like my son might walk through the garage door at any moment asking why we were standing around his jacket like it was something sacred. My fingers brushed against folded paper inside the pocket. Melissa stepped forward almost immediately. "Evelyn," she said with a nervous laugh, "you really do not need to go through his things tonight." I pulled the paper out carefully. It was a receipt. A hotel receipt from downtown Chicago. The date caught my attention immediately because it was from 3 weeks earlier, during the exact weekend Daniel had flown to Denver for a construction conference. I frowned slightly. "That is strange," I murmured without thinking. Melissa's expression changed for only a second, but I noticed it. Panic. Fast and sharp before disappearing behind her polished smile. "Daniel traveled constantly," she replied quickly. "It probably means nothing." I looked down again. 2 guests. 1 room. My stomach tightened. "But Daniel was in Colorado that weekend," I said softly. Melissa shrugged too casually. "Maybe he canceled his trip." I stared at her. "I drove him to the airport myself." Silence settled heavily between us. Somewhere upstairs, the heating system clicked on with a low hum. Melissa walked past me toward the kitchen and picked up one of the wine glasses from the sink. "Honestly, Evelyn, this is probably not the time to obsess over receipts." Her voice stayed calm, but her movements looked rushed now. Unsteady. She rinsed the glass immediately even though it was already clean. I folded the receipt slowly and slipped it into my coat pocket without responding. That was when I noticed something else. Melissa had not touched a single framed photograph of Daniel anywhere in the house. Not one. His smiling face sat on shelves, tables, and walls all around her. Yet she moved through the rooms like he had never existed at all. Later that evening, while Melissa showered upstairs before bed, I remained alone in the living room pretending to organize sympathy cards from neighbors. The television played softly in the background, muted captions sliding across the bottom of the screen. My eyes drifted toward Daniel's leather messenger bag resting beside his desk near the staircase. I hesitated for a moment before walking over. Guilt twisted in my chest. Mothers are supposed to trust their children's marriages. We are supposed to believe the woman our sons choose loves them completely. But something inside me had started cracking open since that phone call. I carefully unzipped the bag. Inside were notebooks, business folders, chargers, and loose receipts. Then I found his phone charger wrapped around a small digital voice recorder. I froze. Daniel hated voice recorders. He used to joke that they reminded him of detective movies from the 1970s. My pulse quickened as I held the device in my hand. There was only one audio file saved. One. Before I could press play, I heard Melissa's footsteps descending the stairs. Instantly, I slipped the recorder into my purse just as she appeared in the hallway wearing silk pajama pants and a pale gray sweater. "You are staying in the guest room tonight, right?" she asked casually. I nodded slowly while keeping my purse close against my side. Melissa smiled politely, but there was tension behind her eyes now. The kind of tension people carry when they are afraid someone is getting too close to the truth. Sleep never came that night. I lay awake in the guest room staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly above me while the voice recorder sat hidden inside my purse on the nightstand beside the bed. Every few minutes I glanced toward the closed door, half expecting Melissa to walk in and demand it back. The house felt unnaturally quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. The kind that presses against your chest until breathing feels difficult. Around 2 in the morning, I finally reached for the recorder. My fingers trembled so badly I nearly dropped it onto the hardwood floor. For a long moment, I simply stared at the tiny screen glowing softly in the darkness. Then I pressed play. At first all I heard was static and the sound of a car engine humming in the background. Then Daniel's voice filled the room. Testing. "'Kay. I guess this thing works." My throat tightened instantly. Hearing his voice again felt almost unbearable. He sounded tired. Older somehow. There was a long pause before he spoke again. If anyone is listening to this someday, it probably means I never figured out how to fix my marriage. I covered my mouth with my hand. Down the hallway, I could hear the faint sound of Melissa moving around in her bedroom, unaware that her husband's voice was drifting through the darkness only a few feet away. "I do not know when things changed," Daniel continued quietly. "Maybe I ignored the signs because I wanted everything to look perfect from the outside." Another pause followed. Then came something that made my stomach twist. "Melissa has been distant for months. Secretive. Always working late with Richard." Richard. The name landed heavily in my chest. Daniel exhaled sharply into the recorder. I kept telling myself I was imagining things. But last Thursday I followed them after dinner. My heartbeat became uneven. They checked into the Lakeview Hotel downtown together. The room suddenly felt freezing cold. I sat upright in bed, gripping the recorder tightly while my pulse pounded in my ears. Daniel's voice cracked slightly as he continued. I did not confront her. I could not. I just sat in my car for almost 2 hours like an idiot, hoping there was another explanation. I closed my eyes, remembering the hotel receipt hidden in my coat pocket downstairs. "Maybe I am recording this because I need somebody to know I tried," Daniel whispered. "I loved her. God, I loved her so much." Hearing the pain in my son's voice nearly broke something inside me. Then the recording shifted suddenly, as though he had picked it up later. "Mom," he said quietly, and this time it felt like he was speaking directly to me through the darkness. "If something ever happens to me, promise me you will not let Melissa manipulate everything after I am gone." Tears filled my eyes instantly. "There are things you do not know yet," he continued. "I have copies of everything secured away. If you find this recording, you will know where to look." Suddenly footsteps creaked in the hallway outside the guest room. My entire body froze. The doorknob moved slightly. I stopped the recording instantly and shoved the device beneath the blanket just as the door opened a few inches. Melissa stood there wearing her pale gray sweater, her face unreadable in the dim hallway light. "I thought I heard talking," she said softly. I forced myself to breathe normally. "I could not sleep," I answered. Her eyes drifted slowly toward my purse on the nightstand. For several seconds neither of us spoke. Then she smiled gently, but there was nothing warm about it anymore. "Tomorrow is going to be a long day," she said quietly before closing the door again. I waited until her footsteps disappeared down the hallway before pulling the recorder back out from beneath the blanket. My son had known. And whatever he had discovered before he died was serious enough that he had prepared for it in secret. The morning of the funeral arrived with a bitter wind that rattled the bare tree branches outside the church parking lot. I stood beside Daniel's casket, gripping a tissue so tightly it had started tearing apart in my hands. The sanctuary at St. Andrew's was slowly filling with people from every part of my son's life. Former coworkers, neighbors, high school friends I had not seen in years. Everyone wore the same expression when they approached me. Shock, sadness, sympathy. But every few minutes, I caught people glancing toward the front entrance waiting for Melissa to appear. She was late. Of course she was late. At exactly 10:15 the church doors finally opened. Melissa stepped inside wearing a long black coat and dark sunglasses despite the cloudy weather. The room shifted immediately. Conversations quieted. Heads turned. She walked slowly down the aisle like someone entering a movie scene, one hand pressed lightly against her chest. Several women rushed toward her instantly, wrapping their arms around her while she leaned into them delicately. Watching her from across the room made something inside me feel strangely hollow. She knew exactly how to perform grief in public. Every movement looked measured, controlled, beautiful even, but not real. I noticed she still had not walked over to Daniel yet. Not once since entering the church had she looked toward his casket. Instead, her eyes scanned the crowd constantly, making sure people noticed her tears. During the service, Pastor Raymond spoke kindly about Daniel's generosity and quiet nature. He talked about how my son volunteered every Thanksgiving, building food baskets for local families. He mentioned the treehouse Daniel built for his niece 3 summers ago, even though he worked 60-hour weeks. Hearing those stories nearly broke me all over again because they reminded me how deeply good my son truly was. Meanwhile, Melissa sat perfectly still in the front pew, dabbing carefully beneath her eyes every few minutes. No tears ever actually fell. Then something happened that made my skin go cold. Halfway through the service, Melissa's phone lit up in her lap. She looked down quickly before tilting the screen away from everyone else. But I saw enough. One name. Richard. Her face changed instantly. Not grief. Panic. She stood abruptly and whispered something to one of her friends before slipping quietly out of the sanctuary. I watched the church doors close behind her while Pastor Raymond continued speaking about eternal peace. My chest tightened painfully. Without fully understanding why, I stood and followed her. Outside, icy wind swept through the parking lot carrying the smell of snow. Melissa stood near the far edge beside a black SUV parked beneath a leafless oak tree. A man remained inside the driver's seat with the window lowered slightly. Even from a distance, I recognized the expensive charcoal suit and silver hair, immediately from Daniel's company Christmas party last year. Richard Hale. Melissa leaned toward the window, speaking quickly while glancing nervously back toward the church. Then Richard reached out and touched her wrist gently. Not like a boss comforting an employee. Like a man comforting a woman he knew far too well. My stomach twisted violently. Suddenly Melissa looked up and saw me standing there near the church steps. Her face lost all color. Richard immediately rolled up the window while Melissa straightened her posture. For a brief second, none of us moved. Then Melissa hurried toward me, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. "What are you doing out here?" she asked breathlessly. I stared past her toward the SUV as it slowly pulled away from the curb. "Who was that?" I asked quietly, even though I already knew the answer. Melissa folded her arms tightly against the cold. "Richard came to pay his respects," she answered too quickly. "Daniel worked for him for years." I looked directly into her eyes for the first time since my son died. "Then why did you look terrified when you saw me?" Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. And in that moment, standing outside my son's funeral while winter wind whipped around us, I realized Melissa was no longer afraid of losing Daniel. She was afraid of what Daniel might have left behind. After the funeral, the house felt colder than before. Not physically colder, but emotionally hollow in a way I cannot fully explain. The sympathy flowers covered nearly every surface in the dining room, filling the air with the heavy scent of lilies and roses. Cards from friends and relatives sat stacked beside untouched casseroles people had dropped off throughout the day. Melissa disappeared upstairs almost immediately after we returned from the cemetery, claiming she had a migraine. I stayed alone in the kitchen rinsing coffee cups nobody had really used. Every few minutes I caught myself listening for Daniel's footsteps out of habit. Grief makes fools of mothers that way. Around 7 that evening, Melissa finally came downstairs wearing soft gray sweatpants and carrying her laptop beneath one arm. She barely looked at me as she poured herself a glass of white wine. "Richard thinks I should take a leave of absence for a while," she said casually while opening her computer at the kitchen island. I dried my hands slowly with a dish towel. "That is thoughtful of him." Melissa nodded without meeting my eyes. "He has been very supportive." There was that word again. Richard. Always Richard. I watched her fingers move quickly across the keyboard, while the blue light from the screen reflected against her face. "You know," she continued carefully, "Daniel had a lot of unfinished financial matters. I should probably start sorting through accounts before things become complicated." I looked at her quietly. "Already?" She sighed dramatically and closed the laptop halfway. "Evelyn, someone has to be practical." Practical. The word sounded almost cruel sitting there beside funeral flowers and sympathy cards. Before I could answer, her phone buzzed softly against the marble countertop. She grabbed it too quickly, but not quickly enough. Richard flashed across the screen again. Melissa stood immediately. "I need some air," she muttered before walking through the back sliding door onto the patio. Through the kitchen window, I could see her pacing beneath the porch light while speaking rapidly into the phone. Her free hand moved nervously through her hair. Twice she glanced back toward the house. I waited until she turned away before quietly walking down the hallway toward Daniel's home office. The room smelled faintly of cedarwood and printer ink. His desk remained exactly as he had left it. Pens aligned neatly beside legal pads. Construction blueprints rolled carefully into tubes near the bookshelf. I sat slowly in his leather chair and opened the bottom drawer. Inside were folders labeled in Daniel's precise handwriting. Insurance, taxes, mortgage. Then one plain manila envelope caught my attention because it had only 3 words written across the front. If Mom needs this. My chest tightened instantly. I stared at the envelope for several seconds before carefully opening it. Inside was a small silver key taped beside a folded sheet of paper. My eyes moved shakily across Daniel's handwriting. Safety deposit box. First National Bank downtown. If you are reading this, it means I never got the chance to explain everything myself. Tears blurred my vision immediately. I pressed the paper against my chest for a moment just to steady my breathing. Then I kept reading. There are documents Melissa does not know about yet. Please do not tell her about the box until you understand what you are looking at. Footsteps suddenly echoed from the hallway outside the office. I slid the envelope shut just as Melissa appeared in the doorway. Her eyes dropped instantly toward the open desk drawer. Neither of us spoke at first. The silence stretched painfully between us. Then Melissa leaned lightly against the doorframe and smiled in that same polished way I had started to hate. "Going through Daniel's things already?" she asked softly. I looked directly at her while slipping the envelope quietly into my sweater pocket. "I could ask you the same question." For the first time since my son died, Melissa's smile disappeared completely. The next morning I drove downtown before sunrise with Daniel's silver key, clutched tightly inside my coat pocket the entire way. Chicago traffic had not fully awakened yet, and the city looked washed pale beneath the gray winter sky. First National Bank stood between 2 glass office towers near LaSalle Street, cold and formal like every other building in the financial district. I sat in my car for almost 5 minutes before going inside because part of me still hoped none of this was real. Part of me still wanted to believe Melissa was simply grieving differently than I expected. But Daniel's voice from that recorder kept echoing in my head. "There are things you do not know yet." Inside the bank, a young employee led me down a narrow hallway into a private vault room lined with metal security boxes. The manager verified my identification carefully before unlocking the box registered jointly under Daniel Carter and Evelyn Carter. My hand shook the moment the drawer slid open. Inside sat 3 thick folders, a sealed envelope, and a flash drive taped neatly to the bottom. Everything had been organized with Daniel's usual precision. I carried the contents into a private viewing room and closed the door behind me. The first folder contained printed emails between Melissa and Richard Hale stretching back nearly 11 months. I stared at the pages in disbelief. Some were business-related. Others were not. Dinner reservations. Hotel confirmations. Private messages written late at night. One line made my stomach turn cold. "Once everything settles, we can finally stop hiding." I pressed my fingers against my forehead trying to steady myself. The second folder contained financial records, transfers between accounts, unusual purchases, credit card statements tied to trips Daniel never knew about. Then I opened the final folder and felt my breath catch completely. Divorce attorney consultations, draft paperwork, notes written in Daniel's handwriting across the margins. "Do not finalize until assets protected. Need proof secured first. Melissa cannot know yet." Tears blurred my vision so badly I had to stop reading. My son had been preparing to leave her. Quietly. Carefully. Alone. I looked toward the sealed envelope next. Across the front, Daniel had written only 2 words. "For." My chest tightened painfully as I opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter folded 3 times. "Mom, if you are reading this, then I ran out of time. I wanted to believe I could fix my marriage, but I finally accepted that some people only love what they can gain from you. Melissa does not know I discovered the affair. She also does not know I changed most of my estate plans 2 weeks ago." I stopped breathing for a second. "Changed?" Daniel continued. "My attorney has updated everything through the family trust. Melissa will receive enough to live comfortably, but she will not control my full estate. I could not reward betrayal. I covered my mouth as tears rolled silently down my face. Even in heartbreak, my son had remained thoughtful, measured, careful not to destroy anyone publicly unless necessary. Then I reached the final paragraph. Mom, I am sorry you are carrying this burden now. But if Melissa tries to manipulate you after I am gone, do not protect her from the truth. I sat alone in that tiny bank room for what felt like forever, staring at Daniel's handwriting, while the quiet hum of fluorescent lights filled the silence around me. Finally, I plugged the flash drive into the small computer on the desk. A single video file appeared on the screen. The timestamp showed it had been recorded only 4 days before Daniel died. My pulse quickened as I clicked play. Daniel appeared sitting inside his office at home wearing the same navy sweater he had worn during our last family dinner. He looked exhausted, older somehow. He stared directly into the camera for several long seconds before speaking softly. If Melissa is acting surprised after my death, he said calmly, then she is lying. 3 days later, Melissa walked into the attorney's office wearing a cream-colored coat and pearl earrings like she was attending a business luncheon instead of a meeting about my son's estate. The conference room overlooked downtown Chicago through tall glass windows streaked with freezing rain. I sat quietly at the far end of the polished oak table beside Daniel's attorney, Harold Bennett, while Melissa placed her designer handbag carefully onto the chair beside her. She smiled politely at everyone in the room, but I noticed the confidence in her immediately. She believed she had already won. Harold adjusted his glasses and opened a thick legal folder in front of him. Thank you both for coming, he said calmly. Daniel updated several estate documents shortly before his passing, so today we will review the final structure of his assets and trust. Melissa crossed one leg smoothly over the other. I appreciate how organized Daniel always was, she replied softly. Organized. The word nearly made me flinch after everything I had discovered. Harold continued carefully. Under the revised trust agreement, the majority of Daniel's financial holdings, investments, and property interests have been transferred into the Carter Family Preservation Trust. Melissa's expression shifted slightly. Transferred? She repeated. Harold nodded. Mrs. Carter, you will receive a monthly distribution and retain temporary residence rights to the marital home for 18 months. However, ownership of the primary estate assets remains under trust supervision. Silence filled the room instantly. Melissa stared at him without blinking. I do not understand, she said slowly. I am his wife. Harold folded his hands together. Daniel made these revisions personally 2 weeks before his death. I watched Melissa's composure begin cracking at the edges for the first time. That is impossible, she whispered. Harold calmly slid paperwork across the table. Everything was signed legally and witnessed appropriately. Melissa grabbed the documents quickly, scanning page after page while color slowly drained from her face. No, she muttered under her breath. No, this is not what we discussed. We. Not I. We. My stomach turned quietly. Harold looked toward me, then reached into the folder one final time. There is also a personal statement Daniel requested be played if questions arose regarding his decisions. Melissa looked up sharply. A statement? Harold nodded once before pressing play on a small speaker beside him. Daniel's voice filled the conference room immediately. Calm. Tired. Certain. If you are hearing this, he said, then it means my mother is sitting in this room, and Melissa is probably pretending she does not understand why I changed everything. Melissa froze completely. Daniel continued. I discovered the affair months ago. I kept quiet because I needed time to protect the people and assets I cared about. Melissa suddenly pushed back her chair. Turn this off, she snapped. But Harold did not move. Melissa, Daniel's recorded voice said softly, the night my mother called to tell you I had died, you said you were busy with your boss. I think that tells everyone exactly who you really are. The room went deathly still. Melissa's breathing became uneven as she stared at the speaker like it had betrayed her personally. This is disgusting, she whispered. He manipulated everything. I looked at her quietly across the table, suddenly seeing her more clearly than I ever had before. Not grieving widow. Not misunderstood wife. Just a woman furious that her secret future had collapsed. Melissa stood abruptly and grabbed her handbag with shaking hands. "You can keep your money," she hissed before storming toward the door. But just before leaving, she turned toward me one final time. For a second, all the masks disappeared completely. No tears. No performance. No charm. Only resentment. "He loved you more than he ever loved me," she said coldly. Then she walked out of the room forever. I remained seated in silence while rain slid slowly down the tall office windows behind us. My son was gone. Nothing would ever change that. But for the first time since that terrible phone call, I finally understood something clearly. Daniel had not left me helpless. He had left me the truth.